I think today we need to hold our children and our grandchildren extra tight.
We knew that the mission was not complete until we were able to bring homicide charges in this case.
Finding a child's remains near a middle school isn't something any dog walker expects to encounter. But September 13th, 2019 was no ordinary day. It was the start of a year-long mystery that left investigators struggling to get answers. That fateful day, an unidentified dog walker was walking near a softball complex across from Smyrna Middle School in Delaware when they stumbled upon the burnt skeletal remains of a young girl. The body was so badly burned that identifying the victim seemed almost impossible. But authorities refused to give up, and after a year of dead ends and uncertainty, they finally had a name: Emma Grace Cole. Rather than providing closure, uncovering the victim's identity only deepened the mystery. What happened to Emma? How did she die? Why was her body burned? And how did she end up near a softball field?
This for a young girl whose remains were found in Delaware, a field there a year and a half ago.
As soon as police learned about the dog walker's shocking discovery, they moved fast. They arrived at the scene, recovered the burnt remains, and launched an investigation. As the investigation unfolded, disturbing details came to light. For starters, the remains had been there for weeks, maybe longer. Based on their findings, investigators estimated that the child was between 2 and 5 years old, likely Caucasian or Hispanic, with slightly wavy brown hair. At first, it seemed like they had something to work with, but just as quickly as the case started, it hit a dead end. The descriptions didn't match any active missing persons cases in the state. And with the condition the remains were found in, identifying the child wouldn't be easy. By now, the case had captured the public's attention. The media was flooded with speculation, not just because of the disturbing discovery, but because no one knew who this little girl was, and no suspects had been named. Law enforcement began calling her Baby L, and the name stuck. 2 months after her remains were found, investigators finally made some progress. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released 2 facial reconstruction sketches showing what Baby L might have looked like in life. To create them, experts ran a CT scan of her skull before handing the data over to a forensic sketch artist. It was clear that authorities were doing everything they could to give this child her name back. But despite their efforts, the case was turning out to be far more difficult than anyone had expected. The sketches generated dozens of tips, but none of them led anywhere. In October 2020, exactly 1 year after Baby L was found, investigators finally uncovered her real identity. A man named James Cole came across the forensic sketch on the Smyrna Police Department's website and immediately contacted authorities. He recognized the little girl because she was his granddaughter, Emma Grace Cole. Emma was just 3 years old. Her parents, Christy Lynn Haas, formerly Christy Lynn Cole, and Joshua Douthit, were quickly pulled into the investigation. But all eyes were on Christy. Almost immediately, she became a person of interest, and the FBI wasted no time tracking her down. Agents set up surveillance outside the Comfort Inn and Suites in Pennsylvania, where Christy was staying with her husband, Brandon Haas, and her 3 other children. They watched as she tossed her trash into a dumpster, then moved in to collect DNA samples from the discarded items. Even though Emma's grandfather had identified her, investigators needed scientific proof that Christy was the child's mother. A few days later, they got their answer. The Delaware forensic team compared Christy's DNA, retrieved from a straw in the trash, to DNA taken from Emma's rib. It was a match. On October 12th, 2020, authorities arrested Christy and Brandon Haas, Emma's stepfather, in Pennsylvania on child abuse charges. It was a major breakthrough in the case, but the real horror was yet to come. Finally, putting a name to Baby L was just the beginning. Investigators were about to uncover a crime that had been carefully hidden by none other than Emma's own mother. When questioned about Emma's whereabouts, Christy didn't flinch. She claimed the little girl had been admitted to a mental health facility in Virginia, even offering updates on her progress and insisting she had visited her regularly. But investigators weren't buying it. They already knew the truth. Emma had been dead for months. After 4 hours of evasions and circular answers, Christy finally broke. Faced with the weight of her lies, she confessed. She told investigators that one morning, sometime before July 4th, 2019, she woke to find Emma lifeless in the bedroom she shared with her brother. In a panic, Christy carried the child into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and held her under the water, as if that could somehow undo what had already happened. But Emma was long gone.
Do it again.
Brandon Haas, on the other hand, cooperated with investigators from the start. He claimed that early one morning, around 5:30 or 6 a.m., Christy came to him with devastating news. Emma wasn't breathing. Like any reasonable person, his first instinct was to call 911. But Christy stopped him. Christy told him it was too late, that nothing could be done. And instead of calling for help, Brandon made a choice that raised a lot of eyebrows. He took their 3 other kids to his mom's house, leaving his wife alone to handle the situation. Once she decided the coast was clear, Christy put Emma's body in her car, drove to the softball field, and left the body there. When Brandon later asked where Emma was, Christy dodged the question. Instead of giving him a real answer, she just said Emma was somewhere beautiful. It was the kind of response that might sound comforting if you didn't know any better, but in reality, it was just a way to avoid admitting what she had done. Not long after, the couple packed up and left Delaware to put some distance between themselves and the crime scene. They settled in Pennsylvania, thinking they had escaped, but their past eventually caught up with them. Christy told investigators she didn't bury her daughter because she wasn't somebody's trash. Instead, she said she burned the body as a symbolic way to set her free. When authorities told Brandon what Christy had done, he broke down in tears. But at that point, what did it even matter? The question on everyone's minds was, what could a 3-year-old possibly have done to deserve such cruelty from her own mother? In May 2021, Christy and Brandon Haas were extradited to Delaware and re-indicted. This time, Christy faced a murder charge on top of everything else. But the investigation wasn't over yet. In fact, authorities were about to uncover even more disturbing details about Emma's short life. With Christy and Brandon behind bars, their other kids were placed in foster care. They were severely malnourished, which made investigators start to wonder if Emma's death had been caused by the same neglect. What they didn't realize was that Emma's siblings held the key to uncovering the full truth. As the children slowly began to heal, they started to open up. And what they revealed was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. One child recounted how Christy and Brandon forced them to do chores far beyond what was appropriate for their age. One of the youngest, still not even 5 years old, was made to scrub toilets, sweep bathroom floors, and vacuum the entire house. But the abuse didn't stop at neglect, starvation, and impossible chores. Christy and Brandon subjected the children to grueling physical punishments, harsh exercises no child should ever be forced to endure. They were made to hold wall sites for excruciating lengths of time and drag a weighted sled up and down the basement stairs. Falling short meant facing even harsher consequences. According to the kids, Christy had no hesitation when it came to using violence to enforce obedience. If they failed to complete their exercises, misbehaved, or didn't perform chores exactly to her liking, she lashed out. And it wasn't just her hands. Anything within reach became a weapon: a spatula, a change purse, a belt buckle, even flip-flops. At one point, Christy even admitted to hitting her children with a hockey puck and a spatula. She claimed, however, that she had stopped using a belt back in 2017 after completing drug rehab. But like so many of her statements, that too was a lie. One of her children told investigators the beatings had never stopped. In fact, the child recalled Christy beating Emma with a belt not long before she was sent to what their mother called a special place. That was the story Christy gave the other kids, that Emma was somewhere safe, getting the help she needed. But nothing could have been further from the truth. As more details emerged from the interviews, a disturbing pattern emerged. Emma had endured the worst of the abuse. One sibling described seeing bruises covering her body, on her legs, stomach, and even her face. The more the children spoke, the clearer it became to investigators just how much suffering Emma had endured in her tragically short life. After reviewing the evidence, a doctor and child abuse expert confirmed what was already obvious. Emma had been singled out. While Christy and Brandon abused all the children, they reserved the worst treatment for Emma. She had been their primary target. When investigators broke the news to Emma's siblings that their sister was dead, their reaction was shocking, but not in the way one might expect. They immediately pointed the finger at their mother. One of the girls recently said, "Mommy's the one who did it." The children had suffered so much at Christy's hands that they didn't need an investigation to tell them what had happened.
And now today, we're learning her mother's charges have been upgraded to murder.
As the legal process progressed, Christy and Brandon were set to stand trial in July 2023. Christy faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without parole, while Brandon was looking at up to 44 years if convicted. But just weeks before the trial, the case took an unexpected turn. In May 2023, Christy agreed to a plea deal. She admitted to first-degree murder by abuse or neglect, abusing a corpse, and 3 felony counts of endangering the welfare of a child. Both the prosecution and defense agreed on a sentence of 30 years for Christy, followed by a 20-year suspended sentence as part of her plea deal. That same month, Brandon also took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 felony and 3 misdemeanor counts of endangering the welfare of a child. What wasn't immediately known was that Brandon had actually accepted this deal months earlier, back in February 2023. In exchange, he had agreed to testify against Christy at trial. The prosecution, however, chose to keep his deal under wraps. They did this because Christy had written a letter to Brandon, telling him to take out a life insurance policy on her. It was clear she was contemplating taking her own life, and prosecutors worried that if she learned about Brandon's plea, it could disrupt their case. But once Christy officially accepted her own plea deal, they no longer had reason to keep Brandon's agreement a secret. Christy and Brandon Haas were both sentenced on September 14th, 2023. Superior Court Judge Noel Primos handed Christy the agreed-upon 30-year sentence for Emma's murder. Brandon, however, received a lighter punishment, just 4 years and 1 month. Prosecutors had pushed for an 8-year sentence, but Judge Primos rejected their recommendation. During her sentencing, Christy addressed the court. She said, "I'm sorry for all the hurt that I inflicted and the pain that I caused. I knew everything was wrong, and I was so messed up because of everything I did. I thought I could get away with it, to be honest." She blamed her actions on her drug addiction and insinuated that her treatment of her children was a result of her substance abuse. Emma's biological father, Joshua Douthit, also spoke. In his statement, he said, "I will never comprehend why Emma Grace had to lose her life. I don't know what this beautiful little baby could have done to deserve this." The truth was, Emma hadn't done anything. She was just a 3-year-old child who had been failed in every possible way, especially by the one person who was supposed to protect her. Which part of this story disturbed or surprised you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more cases like this, check out our next video below.